Welcome to the Union Federation podcast, where we discuss both Star Trek and the Orville here on the Fandom Podcast Network. My name is Kevin. I will be your captain, and this is Union Federation podcast episode 190. We are going to be discussing Star Trek The Next Generation, the best of both worlds, part 1 and 2, and every two-part episode to be reviewed coming up. More on that in a minute. But first, I'd like to introduce my crew for this Union Federation. With me, as always, is the co-founder of the Fandom Podcast Network, my brother and yours, Mr. Kyle Wagner. What's going on, buddy? Welcome.
It's been a rough week. They tried to assimilate me and then they rejected me. I don't know what's going on. But you know what? I feel better. At least they decided it before they put in all the nanobites.
Well, good to have you here. Of course, this is the Fandom Podcast Network, Union Federation Podcast. But you know what? We can't continue without our other guest here, of course, our co-host of Union Federation Podcast. I'd like to welcome Amy. What's going on?
Are you sure you want the Borg Queen here?
This is very fitting, yes. What's happening over in BQN?
Oh, we are getting ready to start the view screen, our YouTube show. So that's going to be starting in right after Labor Day, so beginning of September. Run for 10 weeks, our Sunday talk show. So that's exciting.
Well, I'm excited to have you guys here because we have a fun limited podcast here. I'll get into that in a second here, but this is Star Trek Next Generation, Best of Both Worlds. And we will be discussing every two-part episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. And give a little tease here. We got some upcoming episodes here. We're going to be talking after Best of Both Worlds. We're going to be talking Redemption Part 1 and 2, Unification 1 and 2, Time's Arrow, Chain of Command, Birthright, Descent, and Gambit. And we're going to have one final episode. We'll be discussing all of them, kind of like an overview, giving our final thoughts on them and reviewing them. And we're going to be bringing up some of our other favorite non-TNG Star Trek series two-part episodes. But I wanted to kind of start with the mission statement. Why are we here? Why are we discussing Best of Both Worlds? Well, here's the mission statement, guys. And this is going to be a lot of fun. And I remember when I brought this up with you guys, we were all really excited about, of course, that wonderful last season of Picard, you know. And we got back the original crew, the ship. It was done really well, really fun nostalgia. And for me personally, it found me missing talking about TNG. And I know you guys were feeling that same way, right, Amy?
Absolutely. I just brought everything back to see all of our favorite characters and the comfy blanket that we could wrap up. And it's like, yeah, we need to talk more TNG.
Yeah, we're missing it, Kyle.
Oh, yeah. That final season of Picard was what we all hoped the whole series of Picard was. But yeah, it brought back all the memories, all the feels, and made us want to go back and do these episodes of TNG. And this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, here's the mission statement for these podcasts. This 9-episode limited podcast will be celebrating and rating the 8 Star Trek Next Generation two-part episodes. These 8 Union Federation podcast episodes will cover each of these two-parters, and we'll do a deep dive into each of their stories and the cultural impact that they have had on Star Trek and on fandom in general. And because of your idea, Amy, which I love this, we'll be reviewing these two-part episodes in chronological and air date order. It just makes sense because sometimes some of the stuff that comes up later on will happen because of what happened previously. The final episode of this limited series here will be an overview, of course, of these two-part episodes. We're going to compare the IMDb ratings, of course, and, of course, looking back at our other Star Trek series two-parters. But, guys, I don't know if you recognize this or knew this coming up when this was happening. As of this recording, 2024, it was exactly 30 years ago this year that tonight the journey ends. And I haven't, for you YouTubers up there watching this, I have an ad here. Television legend bids farewell. The 2-hour series finale of Star Trek The Next Generation happened on May 23rd, 1994, 30 years ago. Amy, does it feel like 30 years ago?
You know, this came out a day after my birthday. So my headcanon is like, this was my birthday gift from the Next Generation. I was so excited. It was talked about, announced, and it was definitely must-see TV.
Kyle, what about you? Do you remember this? Because I remember it well.
Yeah, it's a stand-up moment. See, this was part of the problem, though, especially when because all of Next Generation came out when I was living in Alaska, so it was so random. There was no set time. It felt like every week it was on at a different time. It's like, oh, well, we have a time slot here. Let's pop in Next Generation here. So it could get a little frustrating at times, but it also made it kind of more worth it when you actually found it in episodic order or new episodes kind of hitting the syndication in Alaska.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that set TNG apart from other series was these two-part episodes. It became a thing, and we'll dive into that, of course. But I want to kind of show to the viewers up here and also mention to the listeners here, I have a list of all the two-parters here and when they aired. 1990, we had to wait till the end of the third season to get our first two-parter. And, of course, that's Best of Both Worlds. And the first part aired on June 16th, 1990, and then we had to wait till September 12th, 1990 to see part 2. Then in 91, we had Redemption Part 1 and 2, and that was also was it 91? Redemption Part 1 was in June. That was a cliffhanger as well, because we had Redemption Part 2. We had to wait till September to see it. And then Unification aired back-to-back weekly later in 91, in November 2nd and November 9th. In 92, they kept bringing out the two-parters. We had Time's Arrow, another summer cliffhanger, June 13th for part 1. Then we had to wait till September for part 2. Then in December, we had Chain of Command Part 1 and Chain of Command Part 2. Then you go to 93, and we have three two-part episodes, starting with Birthright in February. Birthright Part 1 and 2 were both in February. Descent. Now, this is where we did have the summer cliffhanger. Descent Part 1 was June 21st, and Part 2 was in September 18th. And then we had our final one towards the end of the year in October with Gambit Part 1 and 2 in October. So we'll get into more a little bit now. But I did want to ask you guys before we start talking about the Best of Both Worlds here, and I have the Blu-ray here. We'll get into that too. Did Star Trek TNG set a precedent or a trend with sci-fi shows and their 8 two-part episodes? When I was reliving this and remembering, and what I remember going back in the 90s when I was watching these live, I hadn't really seen the impact that Star Trek had made with two-parters. I'd seen famous two-part episodes in episodic television before. There was always like, you know, your Magnum PIs and $6 Million Mans or whatever. They all had two-parters, but not like the impact that TNG had. Or like, you know, when you would watch like your favorite comedy sitcom and they would have that very special, serious two-part episode. Amy, am I onto something here? Did Star Trek TNG do something special here and people kind of like took notice?
Yeah, I think so. I wasn't well versed in sci-fi. The closest thing I can remember would be Quantum Leap, and they had, I think, a couple two-parters, but nothing like that would stand out in my memory. Of course, we all remember Who Shot JR, like the drama of, you know, those late night soap opera ones. But yeah, as far as like, you're right, the comedies, like it wasn't really, everything was so episodic, you know, it's like one and done. All right, next one and done.
Yeah. What about you, Kyle? Impact that TNG had on two-parters?
I think it set this. It raised the bar. I think, like Amy said, Who Shot JR was probably like the biggest cliffhanger for a season. But the difference was, I think that the slight difference was that even though it was a season finale, we knew it was the continuation of a story right into next season, where Who Shot JR kind of was running a little bit. I think it just set a whole new tone and a whole new approach for how people watched a season finale and a cliffhanger after this, especially in the world of science fiction, where you have so many shows that were science fiction shows that were almost afraid to end on cliffhangers because they didn't know if they were getting renewed for the next season or not, especially at this time. And come on, let's be honest. We don't have this. We don't have the Orville. We don't have Seth MacFarlane's absolute crazy love for Star Trek that brings us the Orville. And for a lot of people, this is really what brought Next Generation to a whole nother level. And I truly think brought Star Trek up to a whole new level for everybody.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're going to get into that even bit more, guys. I'm excited. So we have our first away mission here, guys. Let's get right into it. So one of the things that came up that inspired me to bring this to you guys to talk about and go back to Star Trek TNG, because I remember how awesomely epic these two-parters were, is I found a great article by Dalton Norman. He published this back in 2022 for Screen Rant. And he called it basically Star Trek TNG, every two-part episode ranked according to IMDb. And he did a great little summary on these. And so I kind of decided to take this idea and take the ball and run with it here. And he starts out by saying Star Trek Next Generation took fans in the 23rd century and presented some of the most compelling science fiction in TV history. Occasionally, the exploits of the USS Enterprise D were too much for one simple episode, and the stories branched out over two. Whether it was gripping tales of the Borg invasion or Worf's personal journey within the Klingon society, the two-part episodes of TNG were often some of the most exciting of the entire series. Although all of the two-part episodes are memorable in their own right, some garnered much higher scores than others on IMDb. And of course, guys, we're going to be starting with, of course, probably one of the most famous ones and the first one, The Best of Both Worlds. And we have a little bit of Admiral Log synopsis here. Amy, if you want to go ahead and get us started, go ahead and just read the short one there for give us the air dates too for part 1 and for part 2.
Okay, part 1 aired June 16th, if you remember, beginning of summer 1990. Responding to a distress call on one of the Federation's outermost colonies, the Enterprise arrives only to find a big hole in the ground where the town used to be and discovers the Borg are behind the attack.
All right. And coming up next, we got to wait a whole summer.
Yes, because part 2 airs September 22nd, 1990. And having absorbed Captain Picard and his knowledge, the Borg head for Earth, leaving Riker and the Enterprise desperate for an unanticipated way to defeat them.
That's right. And what's interesting, too, is when we were watching that first episode, which was the last episode of the season, Best of Both Worlds, we didn't know it was a two-parter because it doesn't say up there, Best of Both Worlds Part 1. It just said Best of Both Worlds. So we were up for a surprise, and we'll get into that a little bit more. So regarding this article by Dalton Norman, his write-up of Best of Both Worlds goes as, Best of Both Worlds goes far beyond simply being a great two-part episode, and it shines as one of the best episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation and all of Trek in general. When responding to a distress call at the outer reaches of the Federation space, the Enterprise encounters a decimated colony that apparently has been destroyed by the Borg. When Picard is assimilated, Riker and the rest of the crew must find a way to save their captain and defeat the Borg menace. This episode definitely weaved together several narrative leads that pay off brilliantly throughout the two parts. Riker is tempted by the call of a higher command, while Picard's strategic mind is brought into the Borg collective, which makes him doubly dangerous. While not the introduction of the Borg in the series, Best of Both Worlds really established them as the biggest baddie in all of the Star Trek universe. I want to get your quick response to the write-up of that. Let's start with you, Amy.
Well, I think after watching this, they are set up as the big bad. You remember we meet them in Q Who, but they go through specifically like the Borg can function even if 78% of their ship can be damaged. What?
Yep.
Who can do that? Like puts them above and beyond. Like their phasers had no impact on them. And when they beam over to the board in the first episode, the sound effects, they're walking on metal crate, or just the emptiness, there's no comfort, and they're even sleeping standing up. Like These are like machines. They are so not even human. And that like leads, and I have to talk about the music, man. When they first get the Borg cube on screen, there's chorus. It's
dun,
like
dun, 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 dun,
major,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and it's like this whole buildup this is the big bad of TNG.
Kyle, your thoughts on this article here, and how they're, it's really, the Borg is basically like the Star Trek writers are like, yeah, Romulans, nah, Klingons, nah, you got your big baddie right here.
The thing about the Borg, and even when they were first introduced, and then just they turned up the volume on it so much in this episode, was this thought of how are they going to beat them, and the other aspect of it is they're emotionless, they're uncaring, they are one hive mind, and we know so little about them, truthfully. And then when you go into the cube for the first time and just see how overwhelming it is inside that cube as well, with just the environment they built, everything like that, and then just the look of the board where it's machine, but it's still a living being there. It's everything of our worst nightmare of losing control of ourselves, but still being aware. And when you talk about this two-part series, I think one of the scariest aspects of it is I'm giving away a little bit, but at the end when Picard says he remembers everything.
Yeah.
So then you're like in that concept, I've been assimilated, and even though they freed me, I remember everything that happened to me while I was assimilated.
PTSD, man. Yeah.
That is beyond PTSD. That is the stuff of pure nightmares. And I think that's what the Borg represented for the longest time in Star Trek, was they were that pure nightmare. Like you just didn't, you could die at the hands of a Klingon, you could die at the hands of a Romulan, tortured, whatever. You did not want to be assimilated. Being assimilated was the scariest thing that could happen to you in the Star Trek universe for a very long time.
I'm glad you brought that up, Kyle, because that is definitely one of the things that when you see the Borg, they're very menacing. The way they talk, they're very menacing. There's no reason, you can't reason with them at all. You can't reach any humanity with them. And like you said, too, if they got in your head, if you were lucky enough to get rescued, they stayed in your head. And that was one of the things that we got to see that stuck with Picard through all of his life, all of the series that we saw him, even up and through the series Picard. So yeah, great point on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And their logic is also menacing, because you can't even logic with them, because you're like, well, no. And they're like, it doesn't matter. This is what's going to happen because we are more powerful. We don't care about you. And we have an objective, and you will be assimilated. And that is immaterial. They're so off-putting that it's like, you can't reach them in any way. We can't reach them physically with our, weapons. We can't reach them mentally with our logic. There's no reaching them.
Yeah. Great point. Yeah. And that is what makes them great villains. And I remember too, a friend of mine was saying, because he knew about airplanes and rockets and stuff, and what he said always stuck with me. He's saying the Borg cube flying through space makes complete sense because it does not need to be aerodynamic. You notice all these starships that we see all look aerodynamic because they have to be when they go into like atmospheric locations and stuff like that. The Borg doesn't have to be. What a genius design on an enemy starship. Absolutely love it. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, guys, I want to talk about this. I'm holding this up in my hand right here. This is the Star Trek The Next Generation Best of Both Worlds Blu-ray Special Edition. And if you open it up on the side, first of all, you see Locutus here, and you open this thing up right here in the front, and then you see it's Jean-Luc, and it shows some other characters on it. And then you pop out the Blu-ray here. Well, I bought this when this was released, and I did want to bring up this topic here, was that in 2013, when I purchased this, the Best of Both Worlds was re-released, edited together as a single feature film, released on Blu-ray disc, and shown as a one-night-only event in movie theaters. This version is 86 minutes long, and it was re-released as part of the 2019 Star Trek Picard movie and TV collection Blu-ray release. Now, talking to you, Amy, I asked if you had seen the actual release on the big screen. You said that you did. And I thought that was really cool. I wanted to get your thoughts on the big screen release because I saw it as well. And it was great to see that because they also showed the special features in interviews that are on this Blu-ray disc in the theater.
Yes, this was a huge event and almost life-changing for me. And I'll explain a little bit later. But I remember it very specifically. It was a Thursday night. It was a school night. And it was starting at 7 p.m. The theater, I don't know what the problem was, but they didn't start on time. And so it didn't start till like 7:35. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a 2-hour thing. And then they showed the special effects. And I'm like, or the special features. I'm like, oh my gosh, I stayed up so late on a school night. This was not good. But why this was so important to me, it just brought this love of Star Trek way up front. And that was the first year I attended my Star Trek Las Vegas later in August, because I was just so excited and it was just renewed in my heart again. And then I have been going to STLV ever since.
I was just excited to see TNG on the big screen.
Oh,
I mean,
beautiful.
I've seen whatever Star Trek movies that they released in the theater, but it was great and it was gorgeous because at the time they were releasing the Blu-ray editions of the seasons as well, and they were promoting the season 3 release here of TNG and the special, HD versions that they touched up and took forever to do, and then. But they were promoting season 3 here that I'm holding here in my hand because, of course, this had part 1 of Best of Both Worlds. And I remember going to that Thursday night showing. It was great. And one of the things I thought was cool about it is because this was before the Orville came out at all, guys. And I'm wearing my Orville T-shirt here. But Seth MacFarlane, everyone knows him at the time, of course, as the Family Guy and all that kind of stuff. But he had a small little interview in that. And he talked about how his TNG fandom and how his father was an OG Star Trek fan. And when TNG started, Seth didn't get into it right away, but then he got sucked in. And he talked about recording that part 1, season finale, or the cliffhanger, and like he wore out his VHS tape all that summer just watching anticipation. Kyle, do you remember this being released on Blu-ray or seeing it in the big screen at all? Do you remember this happening?
I remember it being on the big screen. I didn't get a chance to go to it because of the date of when it was and some things that usually are happening for me.
Wait, hold on. It's April 25th, 2013. Is that because that's tax season, Kyle?
Just a little bit, like we're still doing cleanup from tax season, so yeah. But I do remember how big of a deal the Blu-rays were coming out because people were just going crazy to get that quality of Next Generation, because all we had really was the original TV broadcast version of it, and to get that quality of it was just outstanding. Was amazing. And I remember, if I remember correctly, when those Blu-ray sets came out, they weren't cheap either.
Oh, no. They were at least 100 or more, depending on if you were lucky to catch it on sale like first weekend. So that was back in the day when Best Buy would have the new things and they would be on sale for a week or two, and then they would go back up to regular price, but not so much anymore. So I did want to ask you guys, because this is important, and we all have our own experiences of when we first saw Star Trek: The Next Generation, Best of Both Worlds. What was your original reaction to when you first saw this for the first time? And again, remember, for the viewers and the listeners, a lot of us were watching this live when it originally aired, and it was part 1 of a summer cliffhanger, and we didn't know it was going to be a cliffhanger. And I remember going, no. Let me start with you, Amy. Do you remember what was your experience seeing this for the first time?
I'm sure that I thought, I don't really remember. I would have been a junior in high school. But I remember when the DVDs came out, and they were very expensive, like $120. Yeah. And it was just DVD in 2000. And so I got season 2. Wait, no, 3 to 4. No, 2 to 3. When was it? Oh yeah, 3 to 4. End of season 3. Anyway, so I only had it, and there was no streaming service. You just couldn't go, put on Paramount Plus. This was the first time they were out. I didn't have my VHS of it. So I had to wait a long time to get season 4 DVD released. So I feel the pain, just a little bit delayed from in 2000. And it was, I mean, of course I'd seen it and I know, but still waiting. Yes, those big silver boxes.
I'm holding up for the viewers here. This is what the original seasons look like in these large kind of silver box containers. And you know what? I've gotten the Blu-ray stuff. I just can't let these go because of how cool they are.
Those packaging, it is the best packaging ever.
And plus, if you remember, collectors and stuff, that they would release this supplemental DVD that would be that made you want to buy this. That was exclusive to whatever seasons these were. Kyle, what about you? Give us your reactions. Do you remember seeing this for the first time? What was it like?
Well, I saw it for the first time on TV when it actually broadcast, and I was lucky enough to catch it when on the original broadcast. And I think the frustration with it was that to end on that cliffhanger and then have so long between the two, and then when you finally get it, it was one of those times to where it was like when they actually put out the combo Blu-ray or the DVD where you could watch them together, and it just felt that much more satisfying to be able to watch them together like that, instead of, maybe I had a VHS tape and I was lucky enough to get them back to back, but to have that cut DVD so you could just watch them together, that was just the sense of satisfaction. Because it really, I think of all these two-parters, and just because of the importance of it, it's the one two-parter of these Next Gen that truly felt like a movie experience.
I gotta tell you though, when I was rewatching the Blu-ray, and of course you could watch it on streaming and stuff like that, I did kind of miss that cliffhanger ending and then cutting to credits. I did kind of miss that because I missed the dun dun dun, and then the credits started and that wonderful Jerry Goldsmith music starts kicking in and stuff like that. I did kind of miss that because it was more suspenseful, because when you watch the Blu-ray, all of it cut together, it does, you can see where the cut is, but it's not as suspenseful. It's a thing that I missed.
Yeah, I definitely, because it is that cliffhangerness that adds to the enjoyment.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things too, I did want to mention before, I want to go into your favorite moments and scenes in a second here, but in the special features too, one of the things that was brought up was that this was the defining moment for Star Trek: The Next Generation. This is where it came into itself. This is this two-parter that really let people know we're for real. We're the new Star Trek. We're taking it forward, and you need to start taking this seriously now. Would you say that's kind of, Amy, what this two-part episode kind of felt in general to sci-fi fandom?
Yeah, and what I love is that, like, Michael Piller, who wrote it, he sort of has said, I'm done. I'm leaving Next Gen. I'm just going to write something. I don't know how you're going to get out of it, as this is worst case scenario. And he wasn't worried about trying to solve it. But it was like so amazing. And then they thankfully got him back and to continue on. But there was that hesitancy, but that's what made it even better. Like this two-parter, even better.
Yeah, totally. Kyle, your thoughts?
I think what's so magical about this two-parter too, and what it did for Star Trek, even though we are dealing with Picard getting kidnapped and becoming Locutus, William Riker is the star of this two-parter. It is a tour de force performance by Jonathan Frakes in this two-parter. And I think it let a lot of people know that maybe we're just kind of hopping on Next Generation or kind of been iffy or not. This isn't like original Trek where it was Kirk centric. Any of these characters could shine. And here we have maybe our biggest episode, 2 episodes of this show to this point. And while Picard is important, the man who has the spotlight is Riker. And I think that really showed these people there is so much more to this Trek than just Jean-Luc Picard and these characters. Because let's be honest, especially season 2 started to give a lot more life to some of the characters. But I think it was season 3 and having that finale where you have Riker being kind of the focus as far as the character who maybe grows the most in the episode and realizes the most. To add that into what happens to Picard and the threat of the Borg, it makes it's the cherry on top of the episode, and it makes you realize there's so much more to this version of Star Trek than the original series.
And I'm glad you brought up Riker, because Riker had his moments in this, but I felt that season 3 also solidified the fact that we do definitely need to keep the Riker beard. It looked really good.
Amy?
Yeah, I love what you said about that. And the TNG is a true ensemble show. They've got their act together, and every person has an incredible role, including Deanna Troi, where she's constantly counseling Riker and Picard. Mm-hmm. She's managing the separation of the star drive and the saucer section. Like, everyone has a purpose. Worf, Crusher, everyone has a purpose in order to make this work, and it just solidifies them as an ensemble show.
One of the things, and trust me, I know if you're listening to this right now, you're going, "What about Elizabeth Dennehy as Shelby?" Well, we're going to be getting into her her character a little bit deeper coming up. We haven't forgotten about her, and that does remind me too that one of the wonderful things about the Star Trek two-parters is the wonderful guest star appearances in these. We'll get into that a little bit. But first thing, guys, we got some Star Trek trivia on here. We're going to have a little bit of fun with this. Right. We're going to take turns here reading some trivia. I will start. First bit of trivia I have here is Wolf 359 is a real star. It's an extremely faint red dwarf, approximately 7.8 light years from Earth, and the fifth nearest star to our sun. And I just want to mention Haley, our other co-host here of Union Federation, couldn't make it here this evening. And this is a topic I really wish that she could have elaborated on, but we'll get her thoughts on Best of Both Worlds in an upcoming episode. Haley, you are missed. Amy, why don't you go next?
Yeah, so this episode, as we all know, the iconic catchphrase, "resistance is futile," is uttered. And
come on,
we all have to say it.
You can Borgify that a little bit, Amy. Come on.
Resistance is futile.
Yes!
That felt a little Queenie to me, I must say.
I've had practice.
All right, Kyle, you're next. What do we got?
This is the first episode which established Earth as being in Sector 001. Of course it is.
That was like a big deal. It's like, oh crap, Earth is in the center of the universe.
Yeah.
This two-part episode contained graveyard scenes full of wreckage and or damaged starships. These scenes were populated with sturdy models which were considered for use in Star Trek the Motion Picture as possible versions of the Enterprise, and Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, which of course is celebrating its 30th anniversary of this recording as the Excelsior, and some other wrecked ships were created via kit bashing or by quickly mixing starship parts with other various models. Amy.
All right. Well, I did mention this. Michael Piller was initially hired as a freelance screenwriter for only 1 year, with his last script being Best of Both Worlds. The episode ends, of course, with this major cliffhanger, leaving him knowing he'd not be responsible for resolving it. However, this episode alone garnered huge ratings and in general helped push the series from its lower ratings ranking to become the highest syndicated series during this time through the late 80s and early 90s. As a result of that, Gene Roddenberry was so satisfied with Piller's work during the third year of the series that he personally asked Piller to stay on. And this required Piller to create that resolution and kicked off season 4.
I'm just thinking in the writer room for the part 1, I'm like, did he not have any idea? He's like, I don't need to figure it out. Let them get it out of this.
Yeah, and he talks about it on the special features. That's what's so cool about it. Yeah.
Here's some part 2 trivia.
Hey,
Kyle,
Kevin?
start us off. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to go back to the piece of trivia you mentioned about the graveyard.
Yes.
Kevin's dream job, to walk into a room with a bunch of Starfleet ship models and just say, smash them, put whatever pieces together you want. We're going to throw it all on screen. Go have fun.
Oh my God, yes, yes.
So, a little bit more trivia though, too. Prior to filming, LeVar Burton had surgery and his scenes were carefully filmed after the majority of production was concluded. This is why he only appears in close-ups and not in shots with any of the other main characters. Most of Geordie LaForge's lines were given to Cole Meany's Mr. O'Brien.
All right, yeah, this is for part 2 trivia. I'm next here. Whereas The Best of Both Worlds Part 1 originated the half of the Borg's trademark quote, "Resistance is futile." Part 2 originated the other half of the quote, "You will be assimilated." Amy.
Well, the part 2, this was the first episode to establish that shuttlecraft are equipped with their own transporters.
Nice.
Okay.
You got one more for us?
Yeah, the Mars Defense Perimeter ships, which appear as the Borg ships approach Mars, were based on the submarine model used in the Hunt for Red October and were made from the hull of a Russian submarine model kit. It explains so much why they went down like punks so quick against the Borg cube.
Pew, pew, pew.
Okay, guys, I want to get into the next topic here for our away mission. And that is, of course, our cast and guest star discussion here. And I did want to give a shout out here, of course, to Cliff Ball, who directed part 1 and 2. Of course, writing credits were created. Of course, he was created by Gene Roddenberry, but Michael Piller, of course, was the main writer for this. And Ronald D. Moore was the story editor. Of course, we have our main cast guys here, and we'll feel free to jump in with some of these here. But we need to talk about one of our really cool guest stars here. And that is, of course, Elizabeth Dennehy, who plays Shelby in this. And I think that she is the standout on this. She challenges Riker. Wonderful guest star here. And I listened to this. I watched the special features on the Blu-ray, but also I listened to the audio commentary with Denise and Michael Kuda, with her and, of course, Cliff Bole, the director. They did a wonderful commentary. She mentioned that she was 28 years old. She had no idea what the show was about, really. She was a classically trained actor. She came from New York, came to Hollywood, and of course, she's the daughter of legendary actor Brian Dennehy. And if you don't know who he is, probably his most famous role is he played the bad sheriff, I guess you could say, of the small town that put Sylvester Stallone in First Blood. And he was also Cobb in the Western Silverado, one of my favorite Westerns. He was also in Cocooned and Presumed Innocent. And Elizabeth goes on to say she was not a fan of her hair in these episodes. And she also said that Frakes was talking to her saying, let's have some heat between us here. You don't know what's going to happen, and I want to dive into that a little bit more. And one of the things that caught her off guard on the first day of shooting was the schedule. She's used to this soap opera schedule and not this let's just dive right into the deep end. Let's go ahead and get into the first day of shooting here. And she felt that she was not prepared on the first day, but she came in quickly. I wanted to get your guys' first reaction on Elizabeth Dennehy here as Shelby. Let's start with you, Amy.
Well, I was very fortunate to interview her way back on my Trek FM days on Earl Grey. That's episode 214, if you would like to go back and listen to it. And exactly right. She recounts that. And also the Seventh Rule podcast hosted by Sirach Lofton and Ryan T. Husk just covered this that was just released the past 2 weeks. So, and they have her on there. So she does explain, she was used to soap operas and she's used to getting her lines, spending all day in the trailer, memorizing them. She got her lines and she's like, all right, let's go. And it's like, what? I don't know my lines, but how everyone was so gracious. She also talks about her height difference because she's not extremely tall. And Will Riker, Jonathan Frakes, there is over 6 foot. I think she said 6'7", but we know that's not true. I think he's 6'4". And so that height difference and how kind Cliff Bole, the director, was giving her points how to look. So if she was constantly looking straight up at him, that would put her in a position, a subordinate position where she really was his equal. They were both commanders. So like those notes and how it's filmed and shot, where most of the time it's just her and then it goes to just him. And so there's not a lot of times when they're in the same frame. So, so I just thought that that was brilliant. And I love her going up against Riker. Absolutely. The writing, it's so, so good.
You mentioned that, and there's a great line here. It says where they're in when they're in the what is it called, the elevator, she calls it on the commentary, the turbo lift. Says Commander Riker goes, "You disagree with me? Fine. You need to take it to the captain. Fine. Through me. You do it and run around me again. I'll snap you so back so hard you'll think you're a first-year cadet again." She asked to speak frankly, and she says, "You're in my way." Mm-hmm. Really? How terrible for you. All you know how to do is play it safe. I suppose that's why someone like you sits in the shadow of a great man as long as you have, passing up one command after another. Oh, burn. Kyle, your thoughts on Shelby?
It's such an interesting character because she comes in so hot and just on fire from the get-go, but you see her grow through these 2 episodes. And the dynamic between her and Riker is so well done, in that she's basically a younger version of Riker, and how Riker really probably sees a lot of things in him in that from when he was younger in her, but how she makes him question himself, like how he has stagnated. So she's great in that way. She can be, especially in the first episode, you can find her a little annoying, but she grows on you in the second episode as she grows as a character too. But there's one side thing with this character too that I find very interesting, and I'm really curious of your guys' take on it, because it shows me to, even in season 3, how much Picard grew from season 3 to the final season. Because let's not forget, in this episode, the Admiral is all over Picard about pushing Riker out and taking a captaincy, and a later Picard would have probably fought harder against the Admiral about it, siding with Riker and what he wanted. And here Picard's just kind of like, I don't want to say meek, but he's a little bit more giving to the Admiral and, trying to push Riker out and give him the hard time like that. And it almost feels a little bit out of character for the Picard-Riker dynamic at this point from what we know. But then going back, just seeing how the dynamic between those 2 characters changed from then to now, and how this one character really kind of pushed one of our main characters into a different position after this.
It's interesting you say that, Kyle, because in the special features and the interviews, they kind of talk about that a little bit. And Patrick Stewart honestly thought there's a really good chance that he would not return. And if you think about it, at the time, that dialogue of him not returning, because even though they all signed contracts for 7 years, there's an out for Paramount or whatever, saying, "Oh, well, we can drop you anytime," basically. And he thought that he wouldn't return. He thought there was a really good chance of that. Even Michael Dorn thought that too. And so in a way, that's like he's saying to Riker, like, what are you still doing here? You passed up to captain chair positions 3 times. And so that is interesting. That is weird to kind of go back and look at Picard saying that about Riker. But then you just see their bond get so much stronger throughout the 7 seasons. Did you want to comment on that, Amy?
Yeah, well, it's a good thing that he didn't become captain of the USS Melbourne, because at Wolf 359, the ships that were lost was the Tolstoy, some other ship I don't remember, and the Melbourne. He would have been dead.
Yep. One thing I wanted to mention before we go into just to talk on Shelby again, is I'm showing some pictures from the episode here on YouTube. I really wanted to see Shelby again, guys. What I keep going back to is that comment that Elizabeth Dennehy says, that Riker says, "Let's have some heat between us." Of course, coming from Riker, who dates a lot of women in the show and has the alien relationships and stuff. I felt though that there could have been something there. There could have been like a little spark, a little romance maybe, or just like professional courtesy going on and having another adventure. I really wanted to see Elizabeth Dennehy come back. Wouldn't that have been cool, Amy?
Yeah, they're, especially in the second episode, like their mutual admiration when he's like calling her to be the first officer. And it's like, yeah, we don't have to like each other, but I respect you. You respect me. We've got this mutual admiration. So I could see the chemistry, but to me, it was definitely more of sort of like a competition chemistry there.
Yeah. What about you, Kyle? Would you like to have seen more Shelby?
I think it would have been interesting to have a follow up with her late in a later season. You know, maybe with the Borg another episode with the Borg involved, or something like that. You know, where she's like even knows more now, where she's even pushing Riker even harder, and he could maybe even push at that point pushing Picard because she considered herself this Borg expert, and so it's a character that definitely could have been easily revisited. I'm actually surprised they didn't, because this seemed like a character who they set up to have a set story to return on at some point, and it didn't happen for whatever reason.
Right. Yeah.
So with those comments, isn't it a blessing that we got her in Picard season 3? Who knew that she would be coming back? Like how they kept secrets, like we needed to see this conclusion because how amazing guest actor she was on the show.
I would have liked to have seen like, some, a foundation being built like later in TNG. It would I think it would have been cool. Not necessarily Borg related, even though she's become the Borg expert. Obviously, I just would have loved to have like maybe dived into the Dominion War or have like something over in Deep Space Nine. I just would have loved to have seen her character and let her cook a little bit more. So, all right, guys. Well, why don't we go ahead and get into the last away mission that we have here? Let's go and do that. All right, so I wanted to ask you guys, we touched a little bit on this, the impact that's TNG had with its two-parters, but this specific one of Best of Both Worlds, we saw how it affected, as a character, Jean-Luc Picard, even up through the movies, especially First Contact, stuff like that, and seeing what happens, when they try to alter time and destroy basically all the Federation and stuff. I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on the effects. You guys remember the next episode, he goes home. He has a little vacation, and we learn a little bit more about him and his family. Amy, this obviously stuck with this character all through Star Trek, and it was huge of what happened and how the Borg affected him.
Yeah. It's deep. I mean, obviously, I almost, when you were talking about him, and you see the single tear, while he's laying down, and it's like, how would that feel? Like your mind is active, but your body is not in control. Like prison, the paraplegic, it just is terrifying. And we see the other characters of the crew are so worried about him because the love that they have and respect for each other is so real. And everyone's trying to come with all of their solutions. And one thing that I wanted to point out, like the relationship with Guinan and Picard gets shown a light on, where Guinan's like, well, did Picard ever tell you why we were close? And he's like, no. Well, it goes beyond friends. It goes beyond family. And so we get this understanding. And the two conversations that she has with Picard and then Riker in part 2 is a mirror of each other. And Picard is like, walking the ship before the battle and reassuring the crew that we're going to be okay, even though he doubts it. But then Guinan comes into his now captain's office and is like, the crew are scared. And he's like, well, they should be. No, that's not what a captain does. Like those two conversations. So we're getting Guinan. Everyone has importance, and it just bonds the crew together. Like when you go through a difficult time, like I've served in very at-risk schools, like the bonds with those that I have with those teachers is stronger than any other school because we were in the thick of it. And this episode sets it up and makes the relationships of the crew solidified, constant. It's perfection.
Good point. Good point. Kyle, Amy brought up a good point there. It really brings a crew together here. They go through some heavy trauma, life or death situations here. Your thoughts on how this episode impacted the series going forward?
I think this episode changed this two-parter changed everything for this series. I mean, it was struggling in the ratings. This had everybody talking. I don't know anybody who wasn't talking about the finale of episode 1 and then the wait and how excited they were back. It got people buzzing about Star Trek again, and it got people just excited for it in a way I don't think people had been excited for Star Trek in a very, very long time. I think even more so than maybe any of the movies had done in a while. And I think what it did for Trek was, without this two-part episode, there is no DS9, there is no Voyager. If this episode doesn't happen, I would willing to say that you don't even get 7 seasons of Star Trek: The Next Generation without this two-part episode. These 2 episodes might be 2 of the most important episodes in the history of Star Trek.
I was going to say that was a hot take, Kyle, but no, I think you're right. Very well said. And I've heard that echoed from fans and from the cast members, people behind the scene. This was huge. And I think, too, the fact that we had a huge threat of something that was threatening our world of Star Trek. And 2, I think you have a point there. If this doesn't save TNG, we don't get DS9, like you said, Kyle. We don't get Voyager. We don't get all these wonderful stories coming up. And, we think about other famous TV series that we like, Kyle, of certain episodes that define the series and saved them and made people and brought new fans into this. Because I think there was something special about this episode that brought new fans into the series because everyone's talking about it. And I think it might have brought back people that maybe were turned off by the first season and the writer strike that started off with the second season, stuff like that. I felt like this brought people back into it as well, because there was a lot of naysayers about Next Generation when it first started. There was some rough going there. And a lot of people say season 3 is when it really found itself. Would you say, Amy? You're nodding yes.
Yeah, because you also, with the writer's strike for season 2, we had Pulaski. So there was the change of doctor, and people are like, I don't know.
I got a picture here of Beverly shooting a phaser here. We love that. So, yeah.
And so, and then you get season 3, and I think we all agree they're going, but I think they lost viewers, and this got those ones who just dismissed it. They're like, oh, I'm going to give it a try, because season 3 has great episodes, but this brought all the old ones, all the old viewers back. I'm just sure of it.
Kyle.
I think I can say this with confidence, at least for me. No 2 episodes of television turned around a series and at the same time embedded itself into pop culture for all time like these 2 episodes did. Because even non-Star Trek fans now, when you say resistance is futile, they know what you're talking about.
Yep.
These 2 episodes of television are probably 2 of the great, most unique, and yet most impactful episodes of it in the history of television. Truthfully, just for what they did in tying itself into pop culture from now to the rest of the time, and probably literally saving an entire franchise at that time.
I'm trying to remember other 2-part episodes of any television, and I can remember a lot. I think the one that really, like, I feel like there's a Miami Vice thing that really was impactful, that kind of kept that show going and showing that culture. But I think this, you're right, Kyle. I felt that this was one of the most important ones.
Well, and just in your comparison, there was no 2-parter of Miami Vice that was needed to save the show from cancellation.
It's true. Yeah. Well, I want to kind of wrap this up with a couple last questions here, guys. Of course, we're talking Best of Both Worlds Part 1 and 2. the first episode of our limited series here of talking about all the two-parters. Now, obviously, one of the questions I have here, because I think this question I have here is, how does this two-part episode hold up for you now? And you can feel free to express any negative opinions too, if you have any, or more positive stuff. Now, obviously, I think we all are on the same plane about this, but is there anything else about this that makes this extra special after doing a rewatch? Is anything new that you noticed? Amy, I'll start with you.
Yeah, well, thanks for saying we can say some bad things.
Yeah, that's the part.
Yeah, in rewatching this, and I was talking to you before we started. This episode, like, I just remember the words. I warm blanket. I know what's going on. I loved it. The only one thing, if right now we could delete one line, and that it's so cringeworthy when that admiral is talking to Picard in his ready room regarding Shelby, and Picard, because he's like, oh, she's a go-getter, and Picard's like, oh,
are you talking about the creepy old man moment there?
Yeah.
Yes. And Picard's like, oh, you seem pretty taken with her. And then he says, just an old man's fantasy. Gross, disgusting. Delete that line. It doesn't. Ooh. So I can't like give it a perfect 10. This stupid, cringeworthy. But everything else, I could not find one negative outside of that. Everything, the music, the visuals. Oh, that's another thing. I loved seeing these space fights, like the space scenes, because I could see them. When it gets so dark, and you, Kevin, you and I were on the same page. When it gets so dark, I don't even know what ship is firing. I think
Amy's talking about some new Trek episodes.
Yeah. I could see the Enterprise. And when it's like, fire everything she's got, you got to see where the phasers and the photon torpedoes were coming from. Like, I saw what part of the ships was attacking. Like, it built into the story. It moved the story along. And the one single beam of the Borg, when the Enterprise is throwing everything at it, again, just builds to this big bad that the Borg are. Everything just perfect for this. I loved rewatching it completely. And I'm just going to point out, season 4, even though it's supposed to be like continuous, we do get Beverly's longer hair, which I absolutely love her in season 4.
Crushing on that.
We do get Troy in her blue dress. I love it. It is a little booby showing, but I love her blue dress. And everyone, Wesley looks amazing. Everyone's just beautiful, well put together in these 2 episodes.
Before I forget, one of the things I wanted to mention is that you get this is where you get obviously the newer uniforms, but a lot of the extras are still wearing some of the older style uniforms because they still have them around. Yeah. And I had heard behind the scenes stuff that they would like cast certain extras to make sure they can fit these uniforms and stuff like that. But you were right. And Kyle, I want to get your thoughts on this. The effects for me in this series totally hold up. That antimatter spread that they did, all that kind of stuff. You could see everything. Kyle, what about you? Did you have any more positives you want to mention, or did you have a negative? Like, because what Amy was saying when I saw that that Admiral Hansen said that line again, like, cringy.
Again, that's it's one of those things where almost 30 years later, that's the times have they be a changing. You guys talk about the effects, and the effects are good, but there's one aspect of this that makes this feel a little bit dated. And Kevin, I think you'll understand where I'm coming from on this. The reuse of footage in the battle scenes where they use the same shots multiple times.
But at least they're good shots.
But still, there's that. The other thing with this, and I don't think this is the fault of the episode, because it was actually something that I enjoyed being back in this episode, was the Borg being truly scary. Because I think that's something Star Trek has done to the Borg. They've made them so much less scary and so much not the fear factor in the Borg that they were at this time. And I think, there's something about that, and it's interesting because we talk about this, and I want to talk about, Strange New Worlds and what they're doing with the Gorn right now, and the Gorn are terrifying on Strange New Worlds, and that's brought a lot of people comparing what they're doing with the Gorn now to this version of the Borg, where it's just pure terror because there's no humanity there at all. There is nothing to tap to, and obviously they changed that over the years with 7 of 9, things they did with the Borg, even in season 1 of Picard. So it's interesting to me to be able to go back to this and go, this is the Borg that scared the living crap out of everybody. And so I think that it's just an interesting dynamic when you go back and rewatch these episodes.
Well, as we wrap this up, guys, one of the things, of course, that I told you that we're going to be doing, because the original article was rating these, and I wanted to let you guys know that we will be, reviewing these and ranking these and stuff. But the Best of Both Worlds Part 1 and 2 IMDb rating from 1 to 10. Part 1 is 9.3, and Part 2 is 9.2. That is a very high rating for this. And just a real quick, between 1 to 10, Amy, start with you. Give me your rating here on Best of Both Worlds. Just overall. I'm not going to have you rate 1 and 2, but overall, what would you give it?
Yeah, definitely a 9.5. And I hope, listeners, that you can hear the excitement in our voice as we're talking about this. We love this. And it's just so fun to be revisiting this. This is a great way to start off this series. But yeah, it's very exciting. 9.5.
9.5. Kyle, what would you give a rating here?
I'm going to give it a 9.8. This is probably the most historical P2 episodes of Star Trek television ever. I have very little qualms of saying that, even with all the fantastic things we've had coming now with this latest edition of Trek and things that happened in DS9 still might overall be my favorite Star Trek series of this time frame. But I think these are the 2 most important episodes in the history of Star Trek television, because they mean the most to the franchise. And I think they changed so many people's view at the time of Star Trek and what was being done with the Next Generation, that it opened up doors to this day. And without these 2 episodes, I don't think those doors ever get open. And I think it's also just phenomenal writing, phenomenal acting across the board, everything about as close as you can get to perfect television out there.
Good call. These are some good final thoughts here, guys. For my rating, it's funny too, because when I was watching the Blu-ray, as I mentioned earlier, I was missing the actual cliffhanging part of it. So I'm gonna give it. God, yeah, Kyle, you're kind of talking me into this. I'm gonna give it a 9 point. I'm gonna go in between. I'm gonna give it a 9.7. That's my rating on Best of Both Worlds. So when I brought this to you guys and wanting to revisit TNG, one of the things that I got really excited about was being able to talk about, not just when we originally saw these, but also when we, would watch them again and rewatch them. And Amy, you talked about the VHSs, and I would see I always see TNG VHSs all over the place. And, those take up so much more space though, but it's good. It's fun to see those. And as you guys can tell, I got all the Blu-rays and DVDs and such. But one of the things I want to mention too is the next one we're going to be talking about, of course, is Star Trek Redemption Part 1 and 2 coming up here. I'm really, really excited about this. Of course, we get some Worfen on this one, which I think is good. And Klingons were huge in Next Generation. And as you guys wrap this up, give me your final thoughts here. And looking forward to Redemption here, Amy.
Yeah, one thing with Best of Both Worlds, the bar is set high. Like we just said, this 9.5 and above rating from all 3 of us. It's a little scary to think about what's coming up. And that is Redemption Part 1 and 2. And when you said that, I got a little excited because I love going to the Klingon homeworld world And so I'm very excited to see how this compares. Of course, yes, what you said, Kyle, like it saved, TNG and brought those viewers back, like we talked about that. So that has its special place. But as far as another two-parter, like there's some serious consequences for Worf going on here that we've seen, Duras and losing Kalar. So I'm very interested to see how this rewatch goes.
Yep. Kyle.
So here's the thing. While these two episodes saved Star Trek and got people's eyes on them, it was up to the writers then to write television to keep people's eyes on it. And Redemption is one of those two-parters that was written to keep people's eyes on the Next Generation. And especially with the Klingon intrigue and everything going on, it might not be quite, like Amy said, the bar is set so high right out of the gate. But you have to look at what these episodes that we're going to be talking about going forward, what their purpose was.
Yeah.
Where the best of both worlds was, this is the Hail Mary. We're throwing it all out there because we don't know if we're going to get the chance again. Now we've got you pulled in. Now we can really have some fun and explore some things that we've been wanting to explore and get your eyes on it and get you interested in that. And Redemption, I think, is a great two-parter to explore that what they were doing with those ideas and being able to expand on great things in Trek lore, in this case, the Klingon Empire itself, and just the mythology and belief, almost religious beliefs of the Klingons.
Yeah, right. We'll dive into that because TNG really did give the Klingons a culture that we really, really were looking forward to. So let's go ahead and let's warp on out of here and wrap things up. All right, this is the Fandom Podcast Network and the BQN Network. We, of course, are celebrating the Star Trek Next Generation two-part episodes. We just finished up Best of Both Worlds. That was a lot of fun to go back and revisit it and rewatch it. I felt like when I put the Blu-ray in, I sat on the couch, I made my dinner, I felt like I was just watching it again for the first time. It was so much fun. Guys, let's go ahead and get some subspace signals here. My name is Kevin Reitzel. You can find me, of course, on the Fandom Podcast Network and on the BQN Networks, and also on the Facebook groups there for Union Federation. You can find me at Spartan_Phoenix on X, Instagram, all of them, Discord, Letterbox. Make sure you check it out. It's Spartan_Phoenix. Amy, where can we find you?
Well, best place is on Facebook, our Union Federation Facebook group, the BQN Collective Facebook group, and on Discord. So find us there, BQN Discord.
Awesome. Kyle, what about you, brother?
Well, first of all, these damn Borg implants end up everywhere. I'm just saying. But you can find me on, of course, all over the Fandom Podcast Network, on all the great shows there, and of course on the Fandom Podcast Network Facebook page, as well as the Union Federation Facebook page. You can find me on Twitter at AKyleW. You can find me on Instagram and Threads at AKyleFandom. You can find me on Discord at AKyleW, and just wherever else I feel like I'm going to assimilate, I'm going to be there.
Make sure, of course, if you are listening to this podcast, make sure you check out the video on YouTube. Give us a like and subscribe, share it out. We'd appreciate that. And again, please join our Union Federation Facebook group, of course, where we discuss, here on the podcast, of course, with Star Trek and the Orville. Really excited about that. Union Fed is on X and on Instagram, and our master feed for our audio podcast are fpnet.podbean.com, and you can email us at unionfederation@gmail.com. Well, guys, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Appreciate it. And I can't wait for the upcoming episodes because we got some interesting things to talk about. Amy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Kyle, as always, brother, thank you very much.
It's always a pleasure. We'll be looking forward to next time. Hopefully I won't be having Klingon blood rituals like I had Borg encounters in this episode. So
I'm sure there's some rash you could, or some ointment you can put on that, Kyle.
So some Romulan ointment. Just as long as it isn't from Mariner, we're good.
All right, guys, live long and prosper, and we are without a doubt the weirdest ship in the fleet. Until next time.